The hallway was silent, except for the sound of heels clicking against marble. Camilla walked with her chin high, her emerald dress flowing behind her like water. She had walked these corridors 1,000 times. She knew every painting, every gilded frame, every corner where light filtered through stained glass windows. But today, something felt different. The air was heavy. Staff members she passed wouldn't meet her eyes. A young maid quickly turned away, clutching linens to her chest. A senior butler, who normally greeted her with warmth, simply nodded and hurried past. Camilla's stomach tightened. Something was happening. Something she wasn't part of. She rounded the corner toward the throne room. That's where they would be. William had called what he termed an emergency council. Details. No explanation. Just a brief, formal message delivered by an aide that morning. The Queen Consort is not invited. Her breath quickened as she approached the towering oak doors. Golden handles gleamed in the afternoon light. She could hear voices inside, muffled, serious, the kind of tone used when decisions were being made, decisions about the future, about the crown, about power. And she was standing outside. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're captivated by stories of royalty, power, and the hidden moments behind palace walls, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Camilla reached for the door handle. Her fingers wrapped around the cold metal. She began to push. That's when she saw him. A guard stepped forward from the shadows. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a square jaw and eyes that held no emotion. His uniform was crisp, his posture rigid. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply stood between her and the door. Camilla froze. Her hand was still on the handle. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked at the guard, then at the door, then back at the guard. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was steady, but her pulse was not. The guard didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on some invisible point above her head. His hands were clasped behind his back. He stood like a statue. I said, "Excuse me?" This time her voice had an edge. The voice of someone used to being obeyed, still nothing. The guard's face could have been carved from stone. Camilla felt heat rise in her cheeks. She was the Queen Consort. She was married to the king. This palace was her home. And yet here she stood, blocked by a man who wouldn't even acknowledge her words. "Do you know who I am?" she asked quietly. The guard's jaw tightened slightly. That was the only indication he had heard her. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't step aside. Behind the door, voices continued. She could hear William's voice now, clear and commanding. She heard another voice too. Charles, perhaps, and others. They were discussing something important. Something that involved her, she was certain of it, but she was locked out. Camilla's mind raced. This wasn't an accident. Guards didn't block royal family members without orders. Someone had told him to stand there. Someone had told him to keep her out, but who and why? She stood there for a long moment, staring at the guard. He stared at nothing. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Finally, Camilla released the door handle. Her hand fell to her side. She took a small step back, but she didn't leave. The guard remained motionless. The door stayed closed. And somewhere inside that room, decisions were being made that would change everything. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. Camilla stood in that corridor, her mind spinning with questions. The guard hadn't moved an inch. His breathing was so controlled she couldn't even see his chest rise and fall. He was a wall. A living, breathing wall between her and the truth. She studied his face, searching for something. A flicker of sympathy. A hint of discomfort. Anything human. But there was nothing. He had been trained well. Too well. Her thoughts drifted to that morning. Charles had been quiet at breakfast. Distracted, he'd barely touched his tea, barely looked at her. When she asked if something was wrong, he'd simply said he had matters to attend to. What matters? William had arrived shortly after. She'd seen him from a window, stepping out of a black car, his expression grave. He'd walked into the palace without the usual pleasantries, without stopping to greet anyone. And then the message came. Emergency counsel. Throne room immediate. No invitation for her. Camilla felt a cold realization settle over her. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a gathering of those who held real power. The inner circle. The bloodline. And she was not blood. She heard footsteps approaching from behind. Her spine stiffened. She didn't turn around, but she could hear them getting closer. Measured steps. Confident. Familiar. Your Majesty? The voice belonged to Edward, the king's private secretary. A man who had served the crown for 3 decades. A man who knew every secret, every scandal, every whispered rumor that floated through the palace. Camilla turned slowly. Edward stood a respectful distance away, his hands folded in front of him. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed something else. Pity, perhaps. Or discomfort. Edward, she said. Her voice was colder than she intended. Perhaps you might be more comfortable waiting in the drawing room, he suggested gently. I can have tea brought to you, was a polite dismissal. A gilded cage offered with courtesy. I'd rather wait here, Camilla replied. Edward's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. He glanced at the guard, then back at her. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Your Majesty. The meeting is expected to run quite long. How long? That's difficult to say. What are they discussing, Edward? The question hung in the air. Edward's composure faltered for just a second. His eyes flickered to the door, then back to her. I'm not at liberty to say not at liberty or you don't know. Your Majesty, please. I have a right to know what's being discussed in there. Edward's shoulders sagged slightly. For a moment, the professional mask slipped. He looked tired, sad even. With respect, Your Majesty, that decision is not mine to make. Camilla felt something break inside her. Not dramatically. Not with tears or rage. Just a quiet cracking like ice on a frozen pond. She had known, of course. From the day she married Charles, she had known. She was an outsider. The woman who came after Diana. The woman the public never quite forgave. The woman who wore the crown but would never truly belong. But knowing something and feeling it are 2 different things. Fine, she said quietly. I'll wait in the drawing room. Edward looked relieved. I'll escort you. It won't be necessary. I know the way. She turned and began walking. Her heels echoed through the empty corridor. Behind her, she could feel the guard's eyes finally move. Watching her leave, confirming she was truly gone. As she walked, Camilla passed a large mirror. She caught her reflection. The emerald dress. The perfectly styled hair. The face that smiled for cameras and waved at crowds, but her eyes looked hollow. She reached the drawing room and closed the door behind her. The silence was deafening. She stood there alone, surrounded by paintings of kings and queens who had come before. None of them looked like her. And in the throne room, behind those oak doors, the real family was deciding the future. Without her, the drawing room felt smaller than usual. Camilla sat on a velvet chair, her posture perfect despite everything. Years of public life had taught her that much. Sit straight. Look composed. Never let them see you break. But inside, her mind was chaos. She stared at the door, half expecting Charles to walk through it with an explanation, an apology even. But the minutes ticked by, and no one came. The only sound was the antique clock on the mantel, each tick a reminder of time passing, time she was wasting, time they were using to decide her fate. A young servant knocked softly and entered with tea. The girl looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she set down the tray. She wouldn't meet Camilla's eyes. Thank you, Camilla said. Trying to sound warm, the girl curtsied quickly and hurried out. Even the staff knew something. They always knew before the family did. Palace walls had ears. Secrets traveled fast through corridors and kitchens. Camilla poured herself tea she didn't want. The cup was delicate, hand-painted with roses. Charles had given it to her years ago, when things were different. When she still believed she could win them over. Win the public over. Win history over. She had been naive. Her thoughts drifted to William. He had called this meeting, not Charles, William. the future king. The man who would one day sit on the throne and erase her from the story entirely? She remembered his childhood, those sad eyes after his mother died, the way he looked at his father with something between love and resentment, the way he never quite looked at her with acceptance. He was Diana's son. That would never change. And Camilla was Diana's shadow. The woman who destroyed a fairy tale? At least, that's what the headlines said. That's what people believed. The truth was more complicated. It always was. But truth didn't matter in the court of public opinion. She heard voices in the hallway. Her heart jumped. She stood, smoothing her dress, preparing herself. But the voices faded. Someone walking past. Not coming for her, she sat back down. The isolation was its own kind of torture. Not knowing was worse than knowing. Her imagination filled the silence with terrible possibilities. Were they discussing her role? Limiting her duties? Perhaps they wanted her to step back, become less visible. Or maybe it was worse. Maybe they were discussing the marriage itself. Royal divorces were rare, but not impossible. No, Charles wouldn't. He loved her. Didn't he? But love and duty were different things. And the crown always came first. Camilla thought about her life before all this. Before the palace, before the scrutiny, she had been happy once, in simpler times. She had laughed freely, loved freely, made choices that were her own. Now every choice was watched, every word analyzed, every gesture photographed, and still it wasn't enough. The door opened suddenly. Camilla's breath caught. Edward stepped in, his expression unreadable. "Your Majesty, His Majesty, the King requests your presence." Finally, Camilla stood, her legs steadier than she expected. She had spent the last hour preparing for this moment. Whatever came next, she would face it with dignity. "Where?" she asked. His private study, not the throne room, not the council. A private conversation. Camilla wasn't sure if that was better or worse. She followed Edward through the corridors. They walked in silence. She noticed small details she usually ignored. A painting slightly crooked. A window that needed cleaning. A carpet worn thin in one spot from centuries of footsteps. History was everywhere in this palace. History that didn't include her. They reached Charles's study. Edward knocked once, then opened the door. Charles stood by the window, his back to her. His shoulders were tense. He didn't turn around when she entered. Edward left quietly, closing the door behind him. The room felt cold, despite the fire burning in the hearth. Camilla waited. She had learned patience in this life. Sometimes waiting was all you could do. "Charles," she said finally. He turned slowly. His face looked older than it had that morning. Tired, worn. The weight of the crown had always aged him, but today it seemed heavier than ever. "Sit down, Camilla," he said softly. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, and that scared her more than anything else. Camilla sat, her hands folded in her lap. Charles remained standing, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Sadness, maybe, or guilt. "You blocked me from the throne room," she said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. Charles closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were glassy. "It wasn't my decision." "And whose was it?" "William's." The name hung between them. Camilla felt her chest tighten. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was different. "Why?" she asked. Charles moved to his desk and leaned against it as if he needed the support. He looked at his hands, at the ring on his finger, the ring that made him king. "There are concerns," he began carefully, "about the stability of the monarchy, about public perception." "Public perception," Camilla repeated. The words tasted bitter. "Recent polls have been troubling. Your approval ratings have dropped significantly. There's renewed criticism. Social media has been particularly harsh." "Social media has always been harsh. This is different." Charles's voice was strained. "There are calls for change, for modernization. There are those who believe the monarchy needs to distance itself from the past." From her, he meant from her, Camilla took a slow breath. She had faced crowds that booed her. She had read headlines that called her every cruel name imaginable. She had lived with the hatred for decades. She thought she had grown numb to it. But this cut deeper. This was her husband, the man she loved, telling her she was a liability. What did William propose? She asked. Charles hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. Whatever William had said, it was bad enough that Charles didn't want to repeat it. He suggested a reduced role, less public appearances, more distance between your duties and the official functions of the crown. He wants to hide me. He wants to protect the institution by erasing me from it. You're not being erased. You're being recalibrated. Camilla let out a short, hollow laugh. Recalibrated. What a lovely word for being cast aside. That's not what this is. Then what is it, Charles? What would you call it when your stepson bars you from a family meeting? When guards are ordered to keep you out? When you're summoned to your husband's study like a child being scolded? Charles looked away. He had no answer. Or perhaps he had one he didn't want to give. Camilla stood. Her legs felt shaky, but she refused to let it show. She walked to the window, looking out at the gardens. They were beautiful, perfectly manicured, every hedge trimmed, every flower in place, everything controlled. I gave up my life for this, she said quietly. I gave up my privacy, my peace, my reputation. I stood beside you when the world hated me. I smiled through the abuse. I played the role they demanded. And now you're telling me it wasn't enough? Camilla, did you defend me in that meeting? She turned to face him. When William suggested pushing me aside, did you fight for me? The silence was answer enough. Charles looked broken, torn between duty and love, between the crown and his wife. And in that moment, Camilla realized something devastating. She had always known she would lose this battle. From the very beginning, she had known. But she had hoped. Foolishly, desperately hoped that love might be enough. It never was. Not in this world. What happens now? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Charles straightened slightly. Slipping back into his role as king, the personal pain receded, replaced by the mask he wore for everyone else. You'll continue as queen consort. But your public schedule will be adjusted. Fewer engagements, more selective appearances. We'll say it's for health reasons or personal preference. A lie, a necessary one. Camilla nodded slowly. She understood now. This wasn't about protecting the monarchy. This was about protecting William's future. He was preparing for his reign. She didn't fit into that vision. Diana's son would have his revenge, even if he didn't call it that. And if I refuse? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Charles looked at her with something close to pity. You won't. He was right. She wouldn't. Because refusing meant scandal. It meant tabloids. It meant damaging the very institution she had sacrificed everything to support. She was trapped, and they all knew it. Camilla walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, her back to Charles. Do you love me? She asked quietly. The question hung in the air. For a long moment, Charles said nothing. Then, barely a whisper, that's not the question that matters. Camilla opened the door and walked out. The corridor felt endless. Camilla walked without direction, her heels clicking against stone floors that had heard centuries of secrets. Staff members she passed quickly averted their eyes. They knew. Of course they knew. News traveled fast in a palace. She found herself back at the throne room. The guard was gone now. The oak doors stood unguarded, slightly ajar. The meeting had ended. Decisions had been made. Her fate had been sealed while she sat alone drinking tea she didn't want. Camilla pushed the door open. The room was empty. Chairs sat in a semicircle, abandoned. Papers were scattered on a side table. Someone had left a pen behind. The space still held the energy of what had happened there. She could almost hear the echoes of their voices discussing her. Debating her worth, she walked to the throne itself. The chair that Charles sat in for official portraits and ceremonies. the symbol of everything he was, everything she could never fully be. She didn't sit in it. That would be too much. Too bold. Instead, she stood beside it, running her fingers along the carved wood. It was cold to the touch, beautiful but lifeless. Like this life. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. She already knew who it was. She could feel his presence. "William, Your Majesty." His voice was formal, distant. The voice he used for foreign dignitaries and formal occasions. "Not family." Camilla turned to face him. William stood in the doorway, tall and rigid. He had his mother's eyes. That's what everyone said. Diana's eyes watching, judging. "Say what you came to say," Camilla said. William stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew he would one day rule. Someone who was already preparing for that day. "This isn't personal," he began. "Of course it is." Camilla's voice was calm but firm. "Everything about this is personal." William's jaw tightened. "The monarchy is bigger than any one person, including you, including your father. If necessary, yes." The honesty was almost refreshing. At least William wasn't hiding behind pretty words and diplomatic lies. He stood there, the future king, and told her exactly where she ranked. "Nowhere. Your mother would be proud," Camilla said. She hadn't meant to say it. The words slipped out, sharp and cutting. William's expression darkened. Don't. What? Don't mention her? Don't remind you that I'm the woman who replaced her? Don't acknowledge the elephant that's been in every room for the last 20 years? You didn't replace her." William's voice was ice. "No one could." There it was. The truth beneath everything. Camilla could wear the crown. She could stand beside Charles. She could smile and wave and perform her duties perfectly, but she would always be the understudy, the substitute, the woman who took Diana's place, but could never fill it. "I loved him," Camilla said quietly. "Before the crown. Before any of this. I loved your father when he was just a man." It's not relevant, isn't it? Or does love not matter to you? Only duty. Only image. Only protecting the perfect picture. William took a step closer. His eyes were hard. "You want to talk about love? My mother loved my father. She gave everything to this family. She became the most photographed woman in the world. She suffered in silence while he carried on an affair with you." That's not the whole story.
What?
It's the story the world knows. It's the story that matters. Camilla felt something break inside her. Not anger. Not sadness. Something else. A quiet acceptance of a truth she had been avoiding. She had lost. She had lost years ago, perhaps before she even began. Diana's ghost was too powerful. Her memory too perfect. The people had made their choice, and Camilla would always be on the wrong side of history. "What happens now?" she asked. He stepped back, quietly, gracefully. "We tell the public you're focusing on selective patronages and personal interests. Your security detail remains. Your title remains. But your visibility decreases. Until what? Until people forget I exist? Until the focus shifts. Until my father's reign is secure and my transition is smooth. That's what matters." Camilla looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw a man who had lost his mother too young. A man who had been forced into the spotlight before he was ready. A man who carried the weight of 1,000 expectations. She almost felt sorry for him. "You're going to make a lonely king." "William," she said softly. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe, or recognition. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the mask he wore so well. Better lonely than weak. He turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "This isn't cruelty, Camilla. It's survival. I hope one day you understand that." Then he was gone. Camilla stood alone in the throne room, surrounded by symbols of power she would never truly hold. Outside, the sun was setting. Golden light filtered through tall windows, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. She thought about leaving, packing a bag and walking away from all of it, starting over somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knew her name or her story, but she wouldn't, because despite everything, despite the pain and the isolation and the rejection, she was still queen consort, and she would play the role until the very end. 3 days later, the palace released a statement. It was brief, carefully worded, perfect in its ambiguity. Her Majesty the Queen Consort will be reducing her public schedule to focus on select patronages close to her heart. She looks forward to continuing her work in literacy and animal welfare while allowing more time for personal reflection. The media ran with it immediately. Speculation filled the headlines. Some called it a health issue. Others suggested tension within the royal family. A few mentioned age. No one mentioned the truth. No one ever did. Camilla read the statement in her private sitting room. She read it once, then folded the paper and set it aside. Outside her window, tourists gathered at the gates, cameras ready, hoping for a glimpse of royalty. They would see less of her now, much less her phone buzzed. A message from her daughter. A message of support, of love, of outrage on her behalf. Her family had always stood by her. They had weathered the storms together, but they weren't here. They couldn't be. This battle was hers alone. That evening, there was a formal dinner. Camilla was expected to attend. She almost refused. Almost sent word that she was unwell. It would have been easy. It would have been believable, but that would be surrender. So she dressed carefully. A navy gown, elegant but understated. Simple jewelry. Hair perfect. Makeup flawless. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who had survived worse than this. She had survived the British tabloids. She had survived death threats. She had survived being the most hated woman in Britain for decades. She could survive being sidelined. The dinner was formal. Diplomats from several nations. Speeches. Polite conversation. Camilla sat beside Charles, playing her role perfectly. She smiled when appropriate. She engaged in small talk with the ambassador's wife. She laughed at a joke she didn't find funny. Across the table, William watched her. Their eyes met briefly. Neither smiled. Neither looked away. It was a silent acknowledgement. An understanding. This was the game. And they were both players. When dessert was served, Charles reached under the table and took her hand. It was a small gesture, hidden from view. His thumb brushed against her palm. A quiet apology, perhaps. Or simply a reminder that despite everything, he was still there. Camilla squeezed his hand once, then let go. After dinner, as guests mingled in the drawing room, an elderly duchess approached Camilla. The woman was in her 80s, a fixture of royal events for longer than Camilla had been alive. I remember when they did this to Vala Simpson, the duchess said quietly, sipping champagne. Camilla looked at her. Surprised by the reference, they pushed her to the edges, the duchess continued. Made her invisible. Erased her from the story as much as they could. But she survived. She lived her life. And history remembers her anyway. History doesn't remember her kindly, Camilla pointed out. The duchess smiled, a knowing look in her ancient eyes. History remembers her, though. That's what matters. She existed. She loved. She made choices. And no one can take that away, no matter how hard they try. The old woman patted Camilla's hand and walked away, leaving her with those words. Camilla stood there watching the room. All these people, dressed in their finest, playing their roles. Everyone here was performing. Everyone had a mask. But beneath the masks, they were all just human, flawed, complicated, doing their best to survive in a world that demanded perfection. She thought about the guard from 3 days ago. The young man who had stood between her and the throne room. He had just been following orders. He probably went home that night and had dinner with his family. Maybe he told them about his day. Maybe he felt bad about what he had done. Or maybe he didn't think about it at all. That's what Camilla was learning. She was a chapter in everyone else's story, but they were barely footnotes in hers. William saw her as an obstacle. The media saw her as a villain. The public saw her as a homewrecker, but she was more than that. She was a woman who had loved deeply, who had made mistakes, who had tried to build a life in impossible circumstances, and she was still here. The evening ended. Guests departed. The palace grew quiet. Camilla walked back to her chambers, her heels echoing in empty hallways. She passed portraits of queens who had come before. Elizabeth, Victoria, Anne. Women that had navigated their own storms. None of them had been perfect. None of them had been loved by everyone. But they had endured in her room. Camilla removed her jewelry, piece by piece. She washed her face, removing the makeup that had held her expression in place all evening. She looked at herself in the mirror. Older now, tired, but still standing. Tomorrow, there would be fewer engagements. Fewer cameras. Fewer expectations. Maybe that wasn't such a terrible thing, she thought about William's words. Better lonely than weak. But maybe there was strength in vulnerability too. Maybe there was power in simply refusing to disappear. Camilla climbed into bed, the silk sheets cool against her skin. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about the guard, the council. The decisions made without her. She couldn't change the past. She couldn't rewrite her story. She couldn't make the world love her. But she could choose how this chapter ended, and she chose to stay. Not out of stubbornness or pride, but because this was her life, as flawed and complicated as it was, she would be the queen consort. They tried to hide, and she would do it with her head held high, outside. The palace stood silent under the night sky. Inside, history continued to unfold, one quiet moment at a time. And somewhere in those ancient halls, a woman who had been blocked from a throne room decided that she didn't need their permission to matter. She just needed her own.